A couple of reminders about where we're at, what we're doing. We're in the book of I Thessalonians, and I Thessalonians was written by Paul to basically tell them, you can keep doing it, you can go. He helps correct a little bit of what maybe they're thinking, but he's writing to a church that was compelling to the world around them. It was a compelling place to go and be a community, a group of Christians. And people were coming. And so we're studying 1 Thessalonians, talking about what does it mean? What does it look like to be a compelling community for Christ? And today, the compelling church really clarifies its motivations. It has clear motives in what it does. I will say, one of the funniest and cutest things is to watch young boys and girls learning to play baseball or softball. I just absolutely love it. They can't stay focused. They just play around in the outfield. He doesn't know I'm talking about him right now. Even on the simplest hits, they just fumble the ball all around. They can't get a hold of it, and then they go to throw it, and it goes like halfway to left field. And it's so much fun. It's great to be a part of. I'm just quoting from different things I've already seen from their team this year. Forget to touch bases, skip bases, run past other players in front of them. You can imagine that if that's the only kind of baseball that they ever see, they're not going to have a really good idea about what baseball should look like. They have a real difficult time thinking about how this is really supposed to work. So I was talking to Brad and TJ just the other day, and I said, what I really want to do is I want to take Kaylin and William, and I want to go to a minor league game. I want to take them. Why? Why would I want to do that? I want them to see what it looks like, what baseball is supposed to look like. I want to let them see what it looks like when someone pitches the ball, hits the ball, runs around the bases. I want them actually to feel the dust, smell the grass in the air, to get a whole feeling, maybe get some nachos, right? Get a whole feeling about what baseball looks like, and is all like hot dogs. Yeah, for some of us, it's the hot dogs, not the nachos. But we want to get that whole picture, because it's more than just instructions. If I just say, okay, now do this, and do this, and do that, and do this, well, that only goes so far. That's not very inspiring. It's not very motivating. What's motivating is to just be enraptured in the whole picture, to see what it's supposed to look like, to feel the whole thing, the fans cheering, all of it. I want to help them, motivate them to keep working hard. I want to give them an aim, a goal to look at, something to look forward to, not just next week, but far in the future. And the same thing applies to our discipleship, and it applies to our own lives. Do you actually know where you're going? Are you going day to day? Are you figuring out what maybe it might be to improve one little step in your life today? Now, that's a great thing to do, but where are you going with it? Do you know what the end game is going to be and look like? When Paul left Thessalonica, this town in Greece, he was afraid that they were going to return back to the old fumbling habits, back to what you might call T-ball discipleship, getting distracted, start missing out on living for God. And he wants them to keep developing the right way. But just getting vague instructions in a letter is nowhere as good as looking at someone who's modeling what it looks like. A community or a group of men, Paul, Simon, Silas, and Timothy, looking at them to see what it's supposed to look like. So, he might say, we would imagine what you need to say is, be like Jesus, imitate Jesus. Now that's great. That's exactly where we're aiming. That's what we're going. But you know what happens when you say that? Most of us are not 2,000 years old. Jesus had already gone and risen from the dead and was on his throne by the time Paul's writing this letter. We learn and we are motivated more with our eyes than with our ears. We need to see the picture. And so Paul, Silas, and Timothy are putting themselves out there. It's kind of a bold thing to do. But as someone, and it's a group of people who are modeling what it means. So again, Jesus is the perfect one. But believers who can model what it means to live for Jesus, make a big difference. They can start to draw this beautiful picture in our mind's eye of what it means to live like Christ. Otherwise, we're going to just keep fumbling the ball around. We're not going to have any idea what it looks like. We're trying to be church, but man, we just start to look like we're just fumbling around. We're treating each other like everyone else in the world would treat each other. We don't know what we're doing. If we don't have models who are living the kingdom. Now, some of you have had models in your life. You could probably think of a few people in your life, can't you, who modeled what it means to look and live like Christ. And I hope those people, your perspective of those people are loving, caring, wonderful people, not legalistic, kick you in the mouth type people. Because, well, we're going to talk about that because a lot of people have the wrong idea about what it looks like to live like Jesus. And Paul's going to help us this morning learn to embody Christ. And I tell you this, because if you've had somebody model Christ for you in your life, it's time for you now to accept that challenge in your own life, to live like Christ and model it for somebody else right here in Jourdanton. Let's turn and see what Paul has to say about his modeling of Christ and ours. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 1 through 4. And he's talking about how he came to them and how he treated them. And he says this, "For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. But after we had already suffered and been mistreated in Philippi," which is where he was right before he came to Thessalonica, "as you know, we had the boldness in our God to speak to you the gospel of God amid such opposition. For our exhortation," which means encouragement, in telling you about the gospel, "our exhortation does not come from error or impurity or by way of deceit. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please men, but God who examines our hearts." The question, the compelling church, for the compelling Christian and the compelling church, God's pleasure is sufficient for us. God's pleasure needs to be sufficient for us. Even legitimate knowledge, you might know this, but even legitimate knowledge in the ancient world, it didn't come on internet. It didn't come through TV or radio. It came down the road and it stopped in your hometown. And the news or the latest invention or whatever it happened to be was, that's how news and pretty much everything was spread. So you can imagine that there were a lot of snake oil salesmen, people who were just charlatans, people who were fakes. And Paul does not want to be grouped with those people. So that's basically what he's saying. You remember the words from White Christmas? One of the actors said, I think it's as true today. This is what people thought, ancient world and now. Everyone's got an angle. That's from White Christmas of all places. But that's people's cynical attitude. And it was their cynical attitude then. They had snake oil salesmen show up all the time saying this is the newest and this is the best. And they just, like we are, and tired of ads and tired of news and tired of everything. I'm just tired of the fake stuff. And so I just get cynical and not believe anything. And I have to say, it's pretty easy for me to fall into that crowd. But it makes us doubt whether what anyone says is really true. Now, how many times a day when you're watching the news do you say, what's your angle? Watching something, someone's telling you, someone comes up to you and they start talking to you, and you're like, what do you really want? What is it you really want? Paul knows this is going on in their minds. He knows that's what's going on. But he reminds them that he did not come to deceive. He didn't come to tickle ears. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. He asked for neither, and he did without. He made his own whatever he had to do. But Paul is saying that his motivations are true to God's character and purpose, because pleasing God is all he seeks. He just wants God's pleasure in his life. He's not looking for their approval. He's not looking for Rome's approval. He's not looking for Jewish approval. He's not looking for his friends' approval. He is merely seeking God's pleasure. If there are imperfections, they are his, not God's. Paul's greatness was not to be on display. He wasn't selling himself. He wasn't saying, look how good we are. We're awesome. This is the greatest church missionary ever. I'm the greatest one who's ever lived. No, he said, God and Jesus is the most amazing God. He's the most amazing thing you've ever heard of. The gospel is the most amazing news you've ever encountered. Paul preached that the gospel, we have to be, what do you call it? We have to have integrity toward the gospel. Our integrity is very important. And integrity is a very tricky concept. You might not know that, but integrity, especially Christian integrity, is very tricky. Normally, when I say, do you have integrity, or does somebody have integrity, we mean, do you say what you mean and mean what you say? You said you'd be here at noon, and you got here at 1, therefore, you must not have much integrity, right? That's not really that's great as a biblical characteristic when it's done right, but consider this. Some people say bad things, and they do bad things. That's doing what you say and saying what you do. But it's not integrity. Certainly not biblical integrity. Gospel integrity is not just a concept of staying true to my inner self. It's not a concept of it's not even a concept of staying true to society's ideas of what's right and wrong. Because I might have some integrity like, okay, I'm going to be late, but I stopped to help somebody fix their tire. Now our society would all go, okay, that's the best thing for you to do. Well, that is great. That's fantastic and what you should do as a Christian. But that just, right now, the world's ideas of value and Christians are overlapping. Gospel integrity is doing what he said and saying what he did. It is doing as he has said and saying what he did. You get it? That and living it out. Every word that comes out of our mouth is in the concept of who he is. That's gospel. Which means good news. That's cross type of integrity. For a disciple of Jesus, it's trusting that his word is sufficient and all you need. That's it. Your obedience brings him pleasure, and it's simply enough. This is freedom. This is saying, I don't really care. I care, but I'm not really worried about whether my words have pleased everyone in my family. I'm not worried whether it's pleased all my friends or displeased my enemies. I'm worried about whether what I said is God approved. Does he have pleasure in how I'm talking? And the central place the church is attacked in the world is not science. It's not ritualism, but that the church's motivations are for self-glory and self-protection. That we're worried about our pleasure of ourselves or protecting some political institution or protecting our own little world. We don't do what we say or say what we believe. We don't do those things. We claim Jesus is sufficient while at the same time always worried about ourselves or our hymns or our whatever we want. Rather than argue, we might want to reflect regularly on whether or not they're right, whether or not we're having integrity by doing what we say and saying what we do as according to what he wants. So early in his life, Gandhi, y'all are familiar with Gandhi, or at least heard of him, I'm sure. Gandhi had considered the possibility of becoming a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And he was very attracted by Jesus' life and his teachings. And then so he decided Gandhi was going to go attend some church services in Pretoria, South Africa. And he wrote this later. The congregation did not strike me as being particularly religious, which means a good thing for him. They were not devout souls, but appeared rather to be worldly-minded people going to church for recreation or conformity with custom. And so, in other words, people were there to make mom happy. People were there to make their custom, so to network with other folks who were in there just to just to be there just for something for themselves, to fit into their society, to fit into things. And he walked away going, I need something more. It's not true. There's not an integrity between what they say about Jesus and all the love and the community and what they're actually doing. And he walked away. Is God's pleasure enough for you? To hear and know that you'll hear at the end of your life, well done, good and faithful servant. Do we handle real problems in godly ways that a person coming in here would know that there's something of truth and power significantly different than how the world deals with it? Now, for example, one way to get people into church or into anything is to make it a party, a big celebration. And Brad and I were talking about having the integrity and looking at the world. This year has been tough. It's been full of sorrow. It's been full of grief and turmoil and just really difficult times. And worship that just goes on and pretends that everything is perfect and good and joyful, and doesn't deal with people's sorrow and grief in a way that the Bible deals with it, isn't true. Because the integrity of the gospel deals both with the world as it is and our brokenness, hurt, grief, sorrow, and in the joy and amazing grace of Christ, and how Christ is the one who takes us from sorrow and grief to the other side. But if we're always just going, woo, because we want a spiritual high, we're trying to escape the sorrow by throwing a pep rally, that doesn't help people deal with the real grief in their life. It's just a bit of an example of what it means. The gospel is not ignoring pain, sorrow, sin of life, but it's about Him overcoming it. Integrity does not mean we are perfect or powerful in ourselves, but it treats God as though He is. It doesn't come here saying, woo, I'm so excited and full of joy in myself. But it's saying, I had a really tough week. But I know the one who brings joy. I know the one who brings comfort. And I'm here for Him. No other strings attached. The next verses, a compelling community not only repents of impure motivations, but is filled with extraordinary love. In other words, it's not what we're not doing. It's not about just getting rid of things in our lives that are sin or bad or bleak. It's about our motivations, right? It's not getting rid of bad motivations, just that, so they're kind of left in apathy, which is where most of the church is these days. It is being filled with something. And that is extraordinary love. Let's read 1 Thessalonians 2, 5 through 9, and how Paul extraordinarily loved the Thessalonians, and he's passing that along. He says, for we never came with flattering speech, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness. Nor do we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ we might need to have asserted our authority, could have if I needed to or wanted to. But we proved to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond of an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. For you recall, brethren, our labor and hardship, how working night and day, so as not to be a burden to any of you, we proclaimed to you the gospel of God. Paul here in this section I've pulled out here begins in ways that we might try to build ourselves up, right? Flattery, try to get what we want with flattery by wearing a mask to cover up that you're really there for greed, or to try to awe somebody into thinking you're amazing. He says, we didn't do any of those things. And obviously he wasn't trying to exert authority or force to do something. And we might not know We might not want to use those things. We might know better than to use those things. Like, we know not to do that, right? But we also might not care to put something into it. In other words, I'm not to do church, and I'm not here for myself. I'm not here to build myself up. But a lot of times, we're not really willing to put that much into it either. I'll go, I'll be there. I don't want anything out of it, but don't ask me to do anything. And as though that's good enough. And Paul is saying, Paul's saying, I am full of love that motivates me, that makes me want to do something. It makes me active. Like a nursing mother, like a mother nurses her child. And it was kind of shocking that Paul, Silas, and Timothy, as the writers here, compare themselves with a mother nursing a child. In the ancient world, men comparing themselves to woman-like things was a very rare occurrence. In fact, when you look it up, they can find just a couple of things in all the ancient world where this was done, and one of them is Moses. So very few. It's a God-ordained love, isn't it, that mothers give of themselves for their beloved children to grow. And Paul's saying, I'm giving myself rather than getting for myself. This isn't even a transaction where I give you benefits and you give me glory, where I give you stuff and I get some kind of transactional fame or anything. This is simply giving without expectation. Now, in verse 6, Paul also denies that God has ordained positional style leadership. Do you see that? Do you know what positional style leadership is? Positional leadership? The kingdom of God does not work on positional leadership. Just because God entrusted them with the message. Remember Paul just a moment ago, right here, he says, God has entrusted me with the message. Just because you were entrusted with the message doesn't give you a positional authority. Like your boss saying, you go to your boss and you tell him, for example, I don't like this idea, and he says, do it, I'm the boss. That's positional leadership. It means the person who just has the position can tell you what to do, no questions asked. Because he's above you, he can just do it. Now, there are times I know that positional leadership is important. It's important in the military. It's important during an emergency. There's a time for it. But it becomes a bludgeon. Now, many Christians believe they know the truth, so say, I know the truth, and therefore I'm the authority. And because I'm a Christian or whatever, that they can sort of become a bludgeon. Everyone must accept or be condemned. Accept what I say or be condemned, I'm the authority. That's positional authority. What Paul knew is that truth, this is an important part, truth, real truth, is a gift received only through love. Truth is a gift received only through love. Truth is not just an idea. You must understand that wholly. In our world, in the ancient world, totally, what Jesus is talking about, he says what? I am the truth. Truth is not simply an idea. Truth is a person. It is God. It is Christ. That's the big picture of truth. The King of Kings could have come. He could have forced you to do what he says. He could have made you in positional leadership to do exactly what he says. Did he do that way? No, what did he do to show us the truth? He came and he died on a cross to build a relationship with you. To come and say, now do you trust me? Come and follow me if you understand my love. See, we call that relational leadership. That's the highest form of leadership. This positional leadership and relational leadership is how actually leadership people talk about it today. But Paul was talking about it. God and Jesus were practicing that 2,000 years ago. we could not have seen the truth about God and his character and his ways and how much he loves you without that cross. The truth is tied to love. God is love. Truth is a person. You cannot tell the truth without love. It's impossible. You cannot tell somebody that they need to get their act together with God unless you are in a loving relationship with that person or you do love that person. Because, sometimes we have to say, sometimes somebody has to say to me, you need to get correct in this area. But what's the difference if you think that person doesn't care about you or that they love you? It's all the difference in the world, isn't it? Now, we still don't react well to being told to do something differently. But when somebody loves you and they're telling you about God, it's the only way it can work. You cannot beat anyone with a hammer while telling them about the cross. It's impossible. Because one's truth, one is fake. That's the integrity of how we share about Jesus. And if anything shall convince this world again of the truth of Christ, it has to come in love. And we might say, I know, but we're tired of people not listening. We're tired of all the arrogance and ignorance and the people mistreating one another. I'd say this, let us never tire of love. Are you investing in people's lives with the truth? Or are we just yelling in society? Are we just yelling at one another, do what I say? Maybe family. You need to change. I know that building relationships can get very difficult and a wearying sacrifice from time to time. It can be difficult. Sometimes it's really tough when you don't know the immediate results. You've worked with somebody and you've worked in ministry and you've cared about folks and nothing seems to be coming to fruition. It can seem a waste of time when you have little results. But I remember this story from a 19th century politician named Charles Francis Adams. And one day he wrote in his diary, "Went fishing with my son today. Wasted a day." Apparently, he didn't talk to him much. He didn't spend a lot of time doing what he thought was fatherly sonly. His son, Brooke Adams, made this entry in his own diary a few years later. "Went fishing with my father, the most wonderful day of my life." The father had thought he had wasted his time, as it seemed little had happened. But his son thought so differently. It's a feeling at the times of the end of ministry that you're worn out, and maybe you're tired, that maybe it seems draining. But you never know when you leave that someone who's there, and they might be writing for themselves in their own heart, "I love Jesus more today." It gets difficult and troubling, I know. It may seem in vain. Where are our hearts in this? Are they for ourselves, our own weariness, our own excitement? Are we doing it for the Lord? With our future with God is secure. Our motivation is simply a love that helps people mature. Then Paul here switches. He switches to talking sort of about this, telling people about Jesus, about this almost infancy, nurse to infant relationships, and talking about people who are maturing and walking with them like a father. So there's this next step that he takes, and it's 1 Thessalonians 5, 10 through 12, the last section for today. And he says, "You are witnesses, and so is God, how devotedly and uprightly and blamelessly we behave towards you believers. Just as you know how we are exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children, so that you would walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." So here the compelling church propels people toward the kingdom. In other words, we have an aim. You know, there's a moment in time when you have to let your children go on to make their own choices. And as they grow up, you let them make more choices. But as a father, I know I'm still there to help steer them back when they need help. And he's using this image of a father. Paul didn't just abandon them as they were growing, but he also didn't control them. He says, exhorting and encouraging, which are basically the same thing. They're used synonymously in the New Testament. And then he uses this other word, imploring is how my translation says it. This word carries the idea of a witness. It carries the idea of a witness with force, you might say. I call this a loving accountability. Have you ever heard of having an accountability partner? Keeping accountable to somebody? Here, not only is he giving them encouragement, but because there's a goal, he keeps them accountable. In other words, I'm going to help you keep going the right direction. You've steered off, I'm going to push you back this way. Oh, you're that way, I'm going to push you back this way. I'm encouraging, go, 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 whoop, scoot back to the middle. Get back on track. That's kind of the image that he's giving, then exhortation, encouragement, and imploring. He's witnessing what they're doing and keeping them accountable. You know, this is much more than cheering them on for their endeavors, which we're told, and it's correct, to cheer people on when they're going through accomplishments or doing what they do. But sometimes people are headed the wrong direction. They just are in life. And the exhortation, again, is to stay the course in the same direction or the right direction. Paul has done some of the cheering where we all want to celebrate an accomplishment. So Brad last week gave an example with William, saying when William got his first hit, we just went bananas. We were so excited when William got his first hit. We were celebrating that success. And Paul last week, as we were, especially in chapter 1, as he's cheering them on, is going like, yeah, you're doing great, you're doing that. But here, he's reminding them of a backstory. How did they get to that place where there was celebration? Now, again, we need to celebrate each other's victories. But it took hard work, energy, and practice, and likely some conflicts and resolution for the Thessalonians to get to that. We know they endured persecution and anger from family members. Paul is telling them this, that they realize the long journey behind them has brought a moment of celebration, but it also encourages them to keep moving forward for more greater moments of celebration. He's propelling them toward the aim, the goal, the success that everyone wants to see for the parents. Because they want maturity. They want to look, act, and have that kind of relationship with each other and with God that Paul has. I like to say that I'm not raising kids. I'm raising adults. In other words, when I go, for example, I don't raise tomato plants. I raise tomatoes. It's not been very productive if all I have is a plant, pretty as they are. But what I'm raising are people, children, who are going to have fruit. That's the aim. And you do what it takes to get that person, that child, from childhood to being a fruitful, responsible adult. Because that's the point. That is your charge as an adult, as a parent. That is also what Paul is saying is his charge to them, but it's also becoming their responsibility for those to whom they've led to Christ, or those who are in their church that are not mature, is to take them and bring them along to producing fruit. It's a beautiful picture in many ways. The backstory to Williams is much like Williams' story about cheering, is much like what Paul was saying. His hit was his willingness to go into the backyard with several different, I won't just say it was me, with several different encouragers, different people who told him and gave him information, taught him how to stand, how to hold the bat, how to swing the bat, and then practiced over and over again until he hit it. We had all that in mind with the focus that he would get a hit someday. And it happened, and we celebrated. And then the next step, right? So I'm going to take him to a game so that he has this big idea. Now, sometimes I guess you can overwhelm somebody with such a big idea, but I want him to see the beauty of what it looks like. So he is encouraged to do what? Take that next step and that next step until he can begin to replicate, whatever his age is, replicate what the game is supposed to look like. And I'll say this, when he did it wrong, we corrected him. Why? Because we want him to go the right direction. Not because we're angry, not because, we're judgmental or anything like that. It's because we want him to get that hit. I want you to get that hit. I want you to take that next step in your discipleship. I want this church to know and have some idea and some vision for what it looks like to take the next step to looking like the kingdom of God. The Father and family, like encouragement, is what you do for one another. We didn't do it for ourselves. We wanted him to be successful. And that's what Paul's saying the church has to be about. If the church becomes about me being a super popular pastor, something's wrong. If it's about being a super popular church, something's wrong. It's about Jesus Christ and him alone. As a Christian, encouragement helps people, again, envision the person God wants them to be. I want you to keep that in mind. Encouragement helps people envision the person God wants them to be. That's proper encouragement. It's biblical encouragement. You have to encourage people toward that end that he says is a manner worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Paul was coaching them toward success. What is that? Paul says, look at us. And it's the same reason I want William to see the minor leaguer, to see what it looks like in its final form. So it's what becomes our job as a church is to show people what it looks like in a community to serve Jesus Christ. We're that model. That's our thing to be. Not to get caught up in the same conflicts. There will be conflicts, but not to be caught up and die or get broken in the same conflicts that break up families, that break up relationships all around in the world. Might even break you up from a relationship in the world because you follow Jesus. But we're not getting caught up in that. Why? Because we have forgiveness modeled for us in Jesus and in Paul. We have all these different things modeled about how it looks to live like Christ. And I want to say this. Paul says it's God's calling on your life. It's not Paul's calling on their life. It's not me telling you what to do. It's God's calling. He's called you into this life of abundant life that you are either going to get out there and be willing to practice, or you're going to be on the bench. You're going to be on the outside. And you might be on the outside for good. People don't just walk in the door, walk down the aisle, and get what it means to be a Christian. This is your calling. It's your calling not only to form yourself as a model, but to form other people. That's our calling in this church. I want you to take up a life boldly following Christ. I pray you know, while I would love for the church to grow, as that's what makes pastors look good, right? I'm here that you grow in the Lord. And I have my own mentors. I have my own models, and some of you are that model. I'm not going to tell you who, but you are. Maybe in one way or in another, and I hope that I am for you. But we have to continue to understand ourselves as that model. Does that make sense? Not just me as a model, but how we interact. That's the most important model for showing that God is God and God is King, not just my pick, not just my choice, but that He is King, and we all believe that. That is the key. I pray that as you go out, you will find yourself models, but also that you will ask yourself, why am I coming? Why am I here? Is Jesus and is God's pleasure enough for me? And when God's pleasure is enough for me, you will start to grow into this model that we're talking about. So that's our challenge this week. That's your challenge this week. Is God sufficient for you?